So Exulansis is a collection of work which was birthed over the course of 4 to 5 years. That was from 2016 onwards. It actually stemmed from a deeply personal ordeal, and I think the poetry birthed itself in a way that it mirrors and reflects the trauma and the healing journey that happened after that same ordeal. By around 2020, the set of poems and poetry and also the corresponding artworks had sort of formulated themselves and completed, but there was still a bit more work to be done on the book. So I think that's where the COVID and our lockdown actually came into play, because some of the poems were also birthed during that specific year. So the framework of the book is basically built on the concept of human emotions for which you have no names in the English language. Thematically, the book is about loss, about grief, anger, mourning, and it's about finding closure and finding yourself. So apart from that, the book was never really written with the intention of being published. So I think it was one of the most natural ways that pain sort of produced itself. So I tend to think that it was the purest product of pain. So I first came across the word Exulansis in a website called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, somewhere in around 2015. And basically the website, which has now also been published as a book, presents a set of neologisms, which are newly coined words for human emotions and experiences that don't have any words in the English language as at now. And at the time I thought that this was a really beautiful way of depicting certain emotions and their meanings. So fast forward to 2016 and 18, and where I actually had like my personal ordeal or experience as well. And after the poems and the prose and basically the book essentially came together, I was searching for a title for the book, and I realized that there was really no word in the English language to capture that essence of what I was trying to convey. Which is when the word Exulansis came to my mind, because Exulansis essentially means an experience which you give up trying to talk to other people about, because for the simple fact that others just cannot relate to it. So I kind of felt that that was the most fitting title for the book. A touch, a face, lost glimpse in the mirror. Now barely there, now gone. A trick of the eyes like a shadow of a black swan over water. Where does the swan end and the seamless shadow begin? I was capturing the mountains, and he was capturing me. Dusk was falling, and the light was deepening in the belly of the valley. It seemed as if we were sinking into a basin of shadow, the sky above us a bowl of soft, unadulterated light. In the horizon, the cold yellow mountains of San Fernando gleamed harsh and barren in the winter dryness. The mountains called to me in their raspy voices, and my skin and hair rustled in answer. Come, hide in our bowels, they sang. Yes, said my heart. But the light inside was mellow, and outside the winds were bitter, so I stayed. Oh, how I stayed. I will write of you and the way you gleamed in the queer liminal air that was neither winter nor spring, but something in between. How the heavy globules of you weighed down in palmfuls of ripeness, lower and lower and lower, and finally plopped down to the road below and burst open their tangy hearts to the sky and filled the air with sharp, sour sweetness, till the nose twitched and the eyes stung with 1,000 tiny pricks. I think of California, and I think of those oranges, and turning my face up to a bowl full of fruit under an open blue sky. And how when spring came upon us, it came at a slow run, rippling like a glassy wave from the foot of the lonely mountain range and then bursting into sudden bottle-green buds from every pore, breaking old twigs into new flower, and how suddenly you were all the seasons at once, and yet neither. And I no longer knew if I belonged to the frost on your eyelashes or the autumnal darkness seeping from your open mouth, the solstice of your dry passion, or the new shoots sprouting in your hair. I was bits and parts, scattered over a solar ear, no whole. There is an old field made wet with rain and covered again with snow, a blanket of snow, an old comforter of soft, deep snow. Would you go there with me? There is peace there, peace slow falling. They said it is beyond all thoughts of wrongdoing and right doing, and said, you can meet me there. Dearest, when all is said and done, then come meet me there. No beauty can cover the harsh ugliness of desolation but snow, the tragic, haunting, homeless expanse of snow. Last night I dreamed your horse had died, and the dream sat in me like a rock. Do you hear me? A rock, gathered in layers like silt all over me, every inch of my damp skin, until it covered me, and I was a thing of black, dark as a volcano about to spit fire. The dream, a black mood, and your dead horse weighed on me like a dead weight, a body that was not even mine to bury, but had meant the world to you. Your horse was dead, brown mass of wet flesh, and the sea was lapping at the white stringy mane, messy tangle of dead horsehair. Eating with salty lips at his wide, bewildered eyes, no one knew how the horse had died, least of all the horse himself, but there was a frothing at his thick lips bared to show long horse teeth, a horse that had eaten cocaine. Oh, but you had loved that horse once. How much, only I knew. So I, with burning arms, began pulling that lifeless body out to sea. Oh, he was heavy, 10 times as heavy as me, but he was your horse, and your horse was dead. So I must give it a burial fitting, a fitting burial for something you had loved. I pulled, I heaved, and with limbs on fire I pushed him gently out to his watery grave, and the seething sea took him gladly, with a rush, dragged him in ceremoniously, and swallowed him whole. I felt a sear in my soul, but I knew it would rest his bones. So what, in cold blood, your steely voice, eyes, pinpricks of ice, just an animal. Just an animal. It was the horse you loved. Just a miscarriage. It was your best friend's child. Just a relationship. It was the song that had called you home, the seabed where you'd rested your aching bones. If someone were to ask me, my honest answer would be that I don't think of myself as a poet, or at least I try not to, because I feel that the moment you take on the mantle of poet or writer, it becomes an identity, a label, and consequently the performing of an act.
And this leads to it becoming part of your ego. The moment you try to self-identify with something, I feel like you lose something of the truest essence of what it is. I think it was Stephen Fry that said, "We are not nouns, we are verbs. I am just a person who writes or draws or sings." I think we as a society are too focused on labels, on labeling ourselves as one thing or the other. Now, the danger of this is that with each label comes a layer of identity, which feeds into the illusion of our separateness. Poetry should, at its core, seek to shatter this illusion and bring humanity and the natural world more back together into a cohesive whole, like how it was originally meant to be. Writing process is often very introspective and very zoned in on a particular moment. I think the driving force behind my writing is almost always emotion. And I sometimes say this, I feel like poetry is my mother tongue. So, no matter how much of a polyglot you are and how many languages you're fluent in, there's always one language that you tend to think in, that you return to in your most vulnerable moments, that's most closest to your core. So when you're scared or in pain or when you pray, for me that language is poetry. So when I'm experiencing deep emotions, those feelings translate themselves into poetry and they write themselves out. That's how the energy clears itself. I rarely make changes to my poems after I've written them, almost never restructure or edit them. I think also the moment you try to do that, that's your thinking, judging mind coming in, trying to improve, trying to find how to make things more perfect, when in reality the poem birthed in that moment is perfect in itself. And the trick, I think, is to become so fully focused on what you're writing in that moment that perfection arises on its own. I'd also like to quote the words of one of the brilliant Zen or haiku poets, Matsuo Basho, who said, "When composing a verse, let there not be a hair's breadth separating your mind from what you write. Composition of a poem must be done in an instant, like a woodcutter felling a huge tree, or a swordsman leaping at a dangerous enemy." I very much believe in the truth of this.
Your body like a mountain. Your body like a mountain slips and tumbles into me. Breaking into soil, into fragments, rocks come tumbling, fumbling, like stories broken free. Crashing into boulders, heavy boulders of defenses, dashing your stone fortress that you built around your shoulders. Your ribs about to shatter. Caverns open in your chest. Scatter sand, and patter helter-skelter, a rain of rocks earth red, crumbling from the crest. Love runs swift for shelter. Stones slip loose and pelter on my open bones till they come home to rest. Crumbling, breaking, your hellbent spine is aching from the weight. I am your ground to which you come crumbling down. When the skies cease slow their rumbling, and rains loosen earth and brine, then you open like a mine. you open like you're mine. Oasis. My old oasis, green mirage of my pain, where thoughts like bowers, thick tangled, grew free, above and around that most resplendent tree, stout oak of myself and me, has set itself on fire. And the cool blue pond of water, which I dug with broken fingernails, and filled in degrees with tears in pails till it was deep enough to drown in, is sizzling like a hot spring, shooting steam like a geyser, evaporating, evaporating. And oh, my blue oasis that I tended so fine through this weather, and all my thirsty orange trees with their fruit skins taut as leather, that I watered till my eyes ran dry, are cracking in the heat, bursting almost ripe to eat, spitting white seeds at my feet. All that lush green land is burning, and the yielding earth is turning, but a golden whale is lifting, and a paradigm is shifting, and I can finally see, and I can finally see.
So I would like to share a few ideas ahead of Madri Kalugala's release of her second poetry collection, Exulansis. This follows the success of her debut collection, An Almond Moon and the White Owl, which was published in 2016, which at the time I thought was a very promising collection of poetry. Of course, Madri has been writing for a while. I've known her writing for almost 10-12 years. She's one of those poets who doesn't publish too often. Her poetry blog, A Tree Grows in Me, has been around for a while. It's one of the more memorable spaces of its kind. Now, in this instance, more than speak about Exulansis, what I want to do is to draw attention to Madri as a poet and how I situate her in Sri Lanka's contemporary English language poetry scene. Because Madri, for me, is one of those writers who radically, fundamentally kind of recenter or reroute, take us back to what is poetry in poetry. What is poetry in poetry? Because in Sri Lanka, the kind of poetry scene we have, there are two divisions. At one level, we have a mainstream of poetry, published stuff, things that get circulated in public in printed form, things that get quoted in classrooms, things that go into anthologies, that go into curricula, right? Where we see many false prophets, many fake poets, right? Some of them quite successfully running on connections they have made, they have maintained, right? Who get heralded as the poets of our generation, if not the poets of our age. Then at a second division, especially in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, with the kind of impact new media is having in our day-to-day lives, the kind of inroads new media has made into our literary discourses, we have a second branch, a second department of poets who kind of have made a name, who float or who survive on the likes, the shares, the kind of viral comments that they receive in social media interfaces. So these are like two different kinds of poets who don't exactly kind of launch themselves on the quality of the product or quality of the poetry. So in a kind of a very precarious environment like that, Madri for me is someone who radically takes us to the tenets, the basic tenets of poetry as her strengths, the kind of emphasis that can be laid on, things like rhythm, rhyme, the metricality or the metrical features of the poetry, her ear for sound and how she uses that in her poetic arrangements. The powerful sense of imagery, very haunting, very resonant most of the time. And of course, there's a trademark emotional, temperamental turbulence Madri uses to her advantage in her writing. All these come together in a writer who doesn't actually depend on her social media presence or the social connections she has made. So she's a poet in the true sense of a poet. Now, in Sri Lankan poetry, Sri Lankan writing, I would say there's this increasing tendency where everyone seems to think that you can potentially be a poet. It's like the literary version of where you wake up in a morning and you think you can be a rocket scientist, therefore you are a rocket scientist. The same can be seen in the literary field. So I think for me, Madri brings an energy at the dawn of this new decade, where she kind of recenters a discourse that has been badly decentralized to include everyone and everything that's been written as poetry, because everyone is not a poet. I mean, we have to lay some kind of benchmark. We need to lay some basic rules. We need to give some kind of quality assurance, quality assessment, and for me that's where Madri becomes important. Now, if I may just give my own assessment of Exulansis, of which I have read a version. I'm not very sure whether this is the final version, but ahead of publication. In many ways, I would say, for people who have read Madri, people who have read An Almond Moon and the White Owl, or her blog, A Tree Grows in Me. So Exulansis, I would say, builds on the Madri that we know, the Madri we have got to familiarize ourselves with through those twin efforts. The same tone, the same signature can be observed, but in a much more refined and much more urgent way. Perhaps one might say that Exulansis is a kind of a mature rendition of the Madri of yore, probably factoring in the kind of experimentation or the kind of work she has been doing with her writing over the last 3 or 4 years. But definitely, as someone who has read some of the more recent poetry collections, works of poetry emerging from Sri Lanka, it's a very refreshing invitation, I would say, a very refreshing invitation to take a step back and to actually revisit what we want to admit, what we want to appreciate and enjoy more than anything else as poetry. And that is where I situate Madri Kalugala.
The difference between Exulansis and my first collection, The Almond Moon and the White Owl, is basically I think that Exulansis is very time specific and very experience specific. My first collection was essentially a collection of poems that I had written all the way up until the point of publication. So it spanned the years from basically when I was writing when I was around 12 years old all the way up until around 25. So there was like a large time span throughout which those poems accumulated. Whereas for Exulansis, this was those very specific 4 to 5 years, and the experience was also a very, very key and like clear-cut experience. Apart from that, I think that in Exulansis, I also might have more strongly developed my poetic voice, and also the book is more experimental in nature. So it tends to experiment with a variety of forms of rhythm, of the way in which poems are sort of like depicted. So I would say that those are the key differences at the moment.
I personally believe an artist has to be inward-driven instead of outward-driven. I feel like all true or great artists are always connected by one fundamental trait, which is their ability to be in touch with themselves. It's only when you're deeply tuned inward that you learn to listen and let things speak for themselves. You don't try to appropriate that experience or manipulate it for your personal advantage. So as an artist, you have to have self-reflection, self-awareness. You need to know who you are first. If you're able to know that, then afterwards you can, if you so wish, choose to use your art to drive for social change, for politics, activism. That's a personal choice. I tend to say that the fundamental question for me is always how to separate the ego from the art. It's a question that I think I've decided to dedicate my lifetime to answering and analyzing. Because if you're more in touch with your inner self, I think it's easier to not fall into the trappings of ego and self-aggrandizement. I think in the current context of our present day, poets should stop trying so hard to be poets. We live in a day and age where the idea of being a poet is more important than what you actually produce in your writing of poetry. I think social media and this system of instant likes and paid promotions and easy recognition has definitely played a part in this. I see so many poets busy with claiming that they are poets, that they get wrapped up in their self-image and carried away with their own performance. This, I think, is very detrimental to poetry and art and humanity as a whole. I think the poet in today's society really needs to slow down and reconnect first to parts of themselves that they have lost. In this very fast-paced and rushed world of today, I think poets can still play a key role in recentering humanity, bringing mankind back to its lost center. Poetry, if written right, can force the reader to slow down, to stop running and to pause and contemplate. And I really think we need more of that in this world. Human beings are moving further and further away from consciousness and falling into that trap of illusion, becoming deeply embedded in the matrix. Perhaps it's the poets who can help save us.
Hello, my name is Paul Anderson. I'm in France right now, where I have an old house. I worked with Madri on a European Union mission to observe the presidential elections in Sri Lanka in 2019. was a long time ago. But the subject of my little car share monologue isn't beautiful, wintry France in the middle of nowhere. It's poetry. I've been lucky enough to have read the latest poems that Madri has written, and I'm going to share with you my impressions of this wonderful collection. And then I'm going to reread them, because for me the magic of poetry, and the magic in particular of these poems, is in the rereading, is in allowing the words and the ideas and the flow of thoughts, which in this collection are absolutely brilliant, to cook slowly, so that they leave a lasting stamp and a lasting mark.
Then there are the days the black light seeps under the liminal space between the floor and door, and my mind turns to marshland, where thought after thought tries to escape being swamped, now treading light as a bird, testing water, now skipping softly like a stone, somehow trying to evade this slinking black quagmire that will bog them down, like pale corpse after lifeless, laughless corpse.
My eyes have grown irreversibly wide from watching the foot kept wrong, swift slipping, the last hand sinking in the slough, white spider. And now that they've grown 3 feet wider, I find my lids can't close, and so I cannot shut my eyes to sleep. I'd like to write in prisms, talk benignly of my pain, my murdered, martyred self, my bleeding hands and wounds, my own crown of thorns. But self-pity is a form of narcissism too, my child, gazing love-struck into the black pool of your own suffering.
Exulansis is the title of this collection, and it's defined as the tendency to give up trying to talk about an experience, because whether through envy or pity or simple foreignness, people are unable to relate to it. The experience then drifts away from the rest of your life story until the memory of it itself feels out of place, almost mythical, wandering restlessly in the fog, no longer even looking for a place to land. The thing about life is that you can't hide from the words you choose. In this book there'd be no reason. It's the sheer range and the sometimes counterintuitive order that words are put in. The obvious long search for the right one, the mot juste as they say here in France, to accompany fantastic leaps of imagination. Here's a poem that Madri composed on the Orange Line of the Los Angeles Metro in 2017. Blue Collar Man. Blue collar man on a subway train, face pressed thin against the blue-lit pane, eyes on the street turned silver in the rain, where the tracks of life run, run and run again, trying to keep himself sane. Eyes on the flashing neon white lights, eyes on the endless cars in the night, eyes on the buildings rising so bright, eyes taking in each sight after sight, eyes drooped with weariness, closing tight. They said to pull up his socks and tighten his belt, close crop his hair till it was smooth as felt, deal with his cards in the hand he was dealt, shut and numb his heart to the things that he felt, watch the bright city melt. Keep his head hung low and smile, they said, his tongue in his mouth and his thoughts in his head. Then that collar might just turn white instead, and the children keep crying for some more bread. All those dreams gone dead. Blue collar man, as he looks to the sky, face blurs to nothing as the train flashes by. Just an oval of light. Does he laugh or cry? And his eyes turn empty as the years go by. How life does fly. In Exulansis, I learned something I thought I knew already, that language is a precious commodity. Am I right in thinking there's more words now out there than ever in the social media megasphere? In the laughless, lifeless promises and fake utterings of politicians, who we seem to favour so much in many parts of the world these days, their words, once almost mythical, are now lost and out of place, wandering restlessly in the fog.
So when I came back from the United States during the period of my life covered in Exulansis, I basically brought back very little with me. Most of my belongings were left there at my home in the US because I fully intended to return. So what among like the very few things that I brought with me were essentially a set of paintbrushes, 3 sets of Pinelli paints, and essentially a watercolor sketchbook. So when the onset of the trauma actually started happening, I was left with these resources as the only outlet into which I could sort of like pour my pain or what I was going through. So I think the process of the writing and the painting was very interconnected. You can't say that one came before the other, because sometimes the words come first and then the art follows, and sometimes I paint something and then based on that the writing occurs. So that was essentially how, so you can't really separate the two because they're so conjoined together, so the arts and the writing they always go hand in hand. The process was very intuitive, and during this period I also produced a variety of art forms and writings. For example, I started on a memoir, and I also was writing an illustrated storybook, and I even started writing music, like writing songs, lyrics, which is something that I had never really ventured into before. And among those songs we managed to record 2 tracks, which are currently also being released on a lovely Sri Lankan platform for art and music called Utpatti, and you will be able to come across them in the upcoming weeks as well.
To my fellow readers, I would say, if you're reading Exulansis, go into the book with an open mind, the same way you should enter into any book, actually. Dip a toe in, test the waters, don't try to dive in head first. Pause a lot when reading. There's no hurry, the book isn't going anywhere. Feel the emotions that are demanding to be felt. Reading a book is almost a mystical experience in a way, because it's the closest, I feel, that you can get to having a glimpse of or touching another human being's mind. Hold space for that experience. It's one of the few ways you can touch the surface of what another fellow individual on this earth might have witnessed, felt, thought at a given point in time. And there is something very, very human and beautiful about that. So slow down and don't try too hard to read the book. I would say let the book read itself through you.
Psychedelica, or a poem from my bright, burning brain. I guess we should have known life would screw us over in the end. I guess we always knew, was why we tasted it so cautious on our tongues like a stamp, a quiet wonder. Nothing like holding a ticking bomb in the cave of your mouth to make you reflect on the sheer, searing, brilliant, blinding beauty of life. Of course we knew. Life would screw us over in minute ways with the cold precision of a surgical knife. If not, it would not be that familiar, astute whore we knew so well. There in my mouth now blooms a bright red flower. And now I am acutely aware of my own existence, of the breath expanding, stars collapsing, diaphragm opening, galaxies contracting, pupils dilating, heartbeat, blood, pulse, time, bomb. I am atomic. O cold red flower of flesh, whole black holes open in my chest. I am the pathway through the stars. Now I am the star. I shoot at the speed of light, multiplied by infinity, infinity, infinity. You are a tiny speck in my brain now, and my brain a burning field of poppies on fire, oh burning blazing hearts, each with an impassive black eye. Why are we such brilliant, insignificant beings, held aloft like tiny dots in a tremulous sky? And inside the bone-white cage of our cries, a red flower beating. Opening, closing, oh you blooming, brilliant thing, pulsating like a live wire in the dark. Touch me. I am consumed by a seething, electric desire to be consummated by a thing made of light. Let it be anything that will split my brain open and tear the blinkers from my eyes, that will pause thought and bring no thought back to life. In my blind, incomprehensible galaxy of night, night, night. Touch me, my love, my thing of light. We are coming home. We are coming home tonight. Curfew in quarantine. There is a kind of silence to the night that can be understood only by hermits and madmen and condemned prisoners waiting to be hanged at sunrise. It is a silence so replete, so astute that there is a sound to it, a ringing, rippling in circles over and over like the ghost of a note that tremors long after the brass bowl has ceased to ring. A long high note that continues to sing. This is what it's like on curfew nights, when the world has hit a standstill, pressed pause and record, and an emptiness looms like the space where a voice went silent without a cause, and you are left with a why that stretches into infinity. Till Monday, they say. Till Monday, when we'll be number-coded and instead of names we'll be assigned single digits to identify us, and suddenly we'll all become walking numbers in a numerical system as if we weren't already. Identityless but free, oh to be free. Effaced, but it's alright, I don't need my face, but officer, I'd kill for a breath of fresh air. 10 minutes away from my non-stop clamoring wife and the kids howling, they won't stop howling, I don't know what to do to stop them. Away from my hypochondriac mother fretting over the news. 10 minutes away from the stale stench of marriage and family and all the baggages that tie us by the shoestring so we cannot run. Run, just take off and run on that open road to get shot in broad daylight even. 10 minutes of open air and the dusty smell of roads. To close my eyes and pretend I can almost taste the sharp tang of the ocean and the silence, the silence, the silence. 1 and 2 will walk free on Monday and meet each other on the street and furtively risk a greeting under their masked breath. Hello, you too? But if you're an unlucky motherfucker like me, unlucky enough to be a 0 or a 9, you wait, you fucking wait. Till Friday, that's 6 days from now, with your legs itching for the blood rush and your tongue hanging parched and thick like a slug. You wait, you wait, you wait.